Duncan Ford never read other people's things. He told himself this clearly, standing alone in the 14th floor break room at 20 past 11 on a Tuesday, holding a small spiral notebook that didn't belong to him. It was pale blue, slightly bent at one corner, the kind sold in drugstore bins near the checkout. Someone had left it on the counter beside the coffee maker, and he had found it on his way to get water, and he had set it down and gone back to his office. He lasted 11 minutes. At 42, Duncan Ford had built a reputation in Toronto's engineering consulting world for two things: precision and patience. Not warmth. Not the easy, approachable quality that made junior employees feel comfortable stopping him in hallways to share half-formed ideas. He was fair. He was thorough. He had the kind of stillness in meetings that made other people choose their words carefully. And over the years, that stillness had become so closely associated with distance that most of his staff had stopped trying to find the difference between the two. Ford Group occupied 3 floors of a glass tower on Bay Street, and Duncan's office was at the far end of the 14th, the last light on, almost every night, sometimes past 11. It was a habit from the years when staying late had been necessary. Now it was simply who he was. That Tuesday, he had been reviewing a municipal infrastructure proposal when he noticed the notebook on his way through. A small thing. Almost certainly belonged to someone in admin. He had set it beside the coffee maker and gone back to his desk, and for 11 minutes he had stared at his laptop screen and thought about the infrastructure proposal. And then he had gone back to the break room. The notebook fell open near the back. Most of it was ordinary: meeting times, grocery lists, a reminder about a phone call that had already happened. But near the last quarter of the pages, the handwriting changed. It became smaller, more careful, as though the writer had been trying to take up as little space as possible. At the top of the page, 2 words: for Mateo. Duncan read what came after and stood very still for a long time. He had first noticed Saren Locke on her second morning at Ford Group, mostly because she was the only person in the building's 11-year history who had ever managed to send a company-wide email by accident. The message had been intended, apparently, for one person in accounts. Instead, it arrived in the inboxes of all 231 employees, including Duncan himself, at 8:47 on a Wednesday morning, and read simply, "He said the coffee on 14 is better. Is that true, or is he just trying to impress me?" The reply all responses began arriving within 90 seconds. By the time Duncan walked past the main floor reception desk, Saren Locke was sitting very upright in her chair, with the expression of someone who had briefly considered resigning and had now simply decided to wait for the consequences. She had dark hair pulled back slightly carelessly. Her blazer was a shade off from the standard administrative attire. Not wrong, just assembled independently, as though she'd worked it out herself. When she saw Duncan, her eyes went wide. "Mr. Ford," she said, then immediately, "I am so sorry about the email." "Which part?" he asked, genuinely curious whether she meant the content or the distribution. "Both," she said. "All of it. Especially the part where I implied someone was trying to impress me, because no one is, and I don't know why I phrased it like that, and the coffee on 14 is probably not better. I've never actually been to 14. He looked at her for a moment, then, "It is slightly better. The machine is newer." He walked to the elevator. Behind him, he heard a very quiet, very relieved exhale. Saren Locke had been hired as an administrative assistant in the project coordination department. She was efficient, according to the department lead's weekly summaries, quick to learn, attentive, good with clients on the phone. She was also, by some structural quirk of the universe that no one at Ford Group could fully explain, persistently and slightly disaster-prone. She submitted a client report dated the wrong year. Not the wrong day, the wrong year. She locked herself out of the building on an afternoon when the security system was being recalibrated, and waited in the lobby in the November rain for 38 minutes before someone noticed. She ordered catering for the wrong conference room and spent the remainder of the afternoon redirecting 13 different people with handwritten post-it notes, each one apologetic and oddly specific. None of it was careless. That was what struck Duncan when the department lead mentioned these things in passing. Saren Locke worked carefully. She simply existed in slight, consistent friction with the ordinary mechanics of offices and systems, as though they had never fully agreed to cooperate with her at the same time. But the actual work, the documents, the coordination, the output, was good. She caught 2 errors in a supplier contract that the project manager had missed entirely. She rewrote a client briefing note, unprompted, in language that was half the length and twice as clear. She arrived before 8 every morning. Duncan had not been paying particular attention to her. He told himself this later, when it became obvious that he had. On the evening he found the notebook. Saren had been on the 14th floor for the first time. He learned this afterward. She had stayed late to reformat a presentation, her own initiative, no one had asked her to, and when the vending machine on 7 turned out to be out of order, someone passing in the hallway had told her the break room on 14 was still stocked. She'd gone up, bought a bottle of water, sat at the counter for 20 minutes to finish her work, and left. She had left the notebook. She was already on the subway home when she realized it was gone. She turned around. By the time she reached the 14th floor, Duncan was in his office. The break room light was still on. She went in, scanned the counter, the table, the chairs, and stopped when she saw the notebook sitting where she'd left it. She was reaching for it when footsteps sounded in the hallway. Duncan appeared in the doorway. Neither of them spoke for a moment. She was holding the notebook against her chest with both hands, and her expression was not quite embarrassment. It was closer to something like fear, though not of him. Of something he might have already seen. "I left this earlier," she said. "I'm sorry for being up here." "I've been here since 7, he said. "I'm not positioned to comment on late." She almost smiled. Then, did you see anyone in here while it was sitting out?" "I wasn't in the break room all evening," he said. It was not technically a lie. He had picked the notebook up. He had not moved it. Something in her shoulders lowered. Relief, or the nearest thing she would allow herself. "Okay," she said. "Good. Thank you." She moved toward the door, then paused without turning back. "If you find anything like this again, anything that belongs to someone, just leave it where it is. A beat. Please don't open it." Then she was gone. The page near the back of the notebook had read like this. "For Matteo, things to do when he comes home. Go to Kensington Market, he's never been, make dumplings from scratch. He said he wanted to learn how. Rent a car and drive up to Muskoka for a weekend. Just the 2 of us. Let him sleep past 7 without either of us feeling guilty about it." The list continued for half a page. Small things, ordinary things. The kind that only feel large when they've been out of reach for a long time. At the very bottom, in handwriting smaller than everything else, as though she hadn't been certain she was allowed to write it down at all. "If I take the Scarborough overnight shifts on Fridays, I should have enough for the co-payment by end of month. Don't let him know I'm doing it. He'll feel worse." Duncan had set the notebook down. He stood in the break room for a while, not thinking about the infrastructure proposal on his desk or the 7 a.m. call he needed to prepare for, thinking instead about a list of small, ordinary things, and a girl who was working overnight on Fridays so that someone she loved wouldn't feel like a burden. He did not say anything to Saren Locke. But he began to notice things he hadn't been noticing before. She arrived every morning by transit. He could tell by the damp at her collar on rainy days, the same backpack every morning, never a coffee cup from the shop 3 blocks north, that half the staff passed on their way in. She made her own in the 3rd floor break room, 2 sugars, and she drank it at her desk while she worked. She brought lunch. A container from home always packed neatly. She ate half at noon and half standing in the kitchenette later in the afternoon. She stayed late twice a week without being asked. She listened to her colleagues with complete attention, the way some people read novels, as though whatever they were saying genuinely mattered. People noticed this about her without being able to name it exactly, and they responded to it by bringing her things. A piece of banana bread, a coffee cake from someone's kitchen, a clementine left on her keyboard with no note. She accepted everything with a small, real smile. Whatever was left at the end of the day she brought home. He saw her one evening from the parking level, walking to the streetcar stop with a cloth bag. An older man was sitting on the bench at the stop. She reached into the bag, said something Duncan couldn't hear, handed him the clementines. The man nodded. She boarded the streetcar. Duncan sat in his car for a moment with the engine off. She had never been saving any of it for herself. He wasn't entirely sure why this surprised him. On a Thursday in late October, Duncan found something in the Proj Services kitchenette that didn't belong to anyone on that floor. A container of homemade soup in the fridge, labeled in masking tape. Saren, for lunch. No one should work this hard on an empty stomach. Your friend from 9, Lydia. He read the label twice. He put it back exactly where it was. That afternoon, he took a detour past a small cafe on Baldwin Street that he'd been to twice before. He spoke to the owner, briefly. He arranged a standing weekly order, good bread fruit, a note from the cafe that read simply complimentary Ford Group account. The name on the account, AC7. No signature. The packages began appearing in the break room fridge on 3 every Monday and Thursday. No one on the project coordination floor could determine the source. The team developed theories with considerable enthusiasm. Secret admirer, said the data coordinator. Secret nutritionist, said the woman from accounts receivable. I think it's from the sustainability working group, said the project manager. They're always on about food security. Saren Locke opened the fridge on the second Monday and found a seeded loaf and a bag of apples, and she stood in the kitchenette looking at them for a moment with an expression that was not quite surprise, something quieter. She brought them home. She brought everything home. Duncan found himself around this time arriving slightly earlier than usual and leaving slightly later, and he did not examine this particularly closely. In the first week of November, he came in on a Wednesday morning and found the lights on in the small consultation room near the project services area. Saren Locke had fallen asleep at the table. Her head rested on her folded arms. Beside her, a hospital invoice, a printout from the Ontario Health Services portal, a calculator, a pen. Several figures had been circled, crossed out, circled again. A calculation at the bottom of the page arrived at a number that was clearly not enough. Duncan stood in the doorway for a moment. He went and found the thin blanket from the waiting area couch on 3 and brought it back. He placed it across her shoulders as carefully as he could. She didn't wake. As he turned to leave, one of the papers slipped from the table. He caught it, a referral letter from a specialist at Toronto General. Patient, Matteo Locke, 17. Surgical intervention recommended. And then, the wait time estimate, 14 to 18 months through the public system, and beside it, the private supplemental cost for expedited access. A number that made his chest go tight. He placed the paper back exactly as it had been. He left without making a sound. That afternoon, he called the Director of Human Resources. Not as CEO, as someone who had quietly made a decision. Tell me about the 40 Employee Hardship Trust, he said, the one from the original incorporation. It hasn't been activated in about 6 years, Mr. Ford. The process requires a nomination from a non-management employee, multiple signatures from colleagues, then a review committee. Management can't initiate it. Correct. Has to come from the floor. Duncan was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. I won't be doing anything further on this file. The HR director waited. I won't need to, Duncan said. The first signature on the nomination form came from Lydia, the woman on 9 who had left the soup. She signed without hesitation. That girl, she said, gave my clementine to the security guard on Tuesday. She thought I didn't see. By the end of the day, the form had passed through 4 departments. It came back with 29 signatures. HR printed a second form, then a third. The project manager signed it. The building services coordinator signed it. 3 people from accounts who had never spoken directly to Saren Locke signed it because they had heard about the soup. And the apples. And the hour she had stayed late, helping a junior analyst reformat a document he was too embarrassed to ask anyone else about. Nobody made a speech. Nobody organized a meeting. They simply signed. HR called Saren to the administrative services office on a Friday afternoon. She walked in looking slightly anxious. Then she saw the forms on the table, 3 pages dense with names, and she went very still. This is the Ford Employee Hardship Trust application, the HR manager said gently. It's been submitted on your behalf by your colleagues. The review committee has already convened. Saren looked at the first page, then the second, then the third. Duncan was standing just outside the partially open door. He was not reviewing anything. He was simply standing there. He heard her say very quietly, I don't understand. And the HR manager said, you didn't ask, so they decided not to wait. A silence, and then the sound of someone trying not to cry and not succeeding. The first real feeling Duncan Ford had experienced in a long time was something without a good professional category. Somewhere between relief and something else. something he had spent years not looking at directly because it had no obvious place in an infrastructure proposal or a quarterly review. He walked away from the door before she could hear him. The trust covered most of the specialist's co-payment. The gap was not small. The committee had exhausted the current fund balance, and accounting delivered the shortfall figure in a brief email that made the room quiet for a long time. Saren sent a careful, composed email to the team the next morning. "It is already more than I ever expected. I will find another way for the rest of it." She always said that. Duncan spent 2 evenings reviewing Ford Group's charitable foundation documents with his lawyer. The entity was registered with the CRA, dormant but valid and properly structured. Anonymous disbursements to qualifying medical funds were permissible under the trust instrument. No individual gift, no personal transaction, everything clean. He made the transfer on a Wednesday evening after everyone had gone home. The hospital received confirmation the following morning. He didn't tell her. He didn't plan to. But on the last Friday of November, when he took the back elevator instead of the main one, the doors opened on 3 and Saren Locke stepped in. She was carrying her backpack and a cloth bag, and when she saw him she went through the brief familiar recalibration his employees made when they found themselves alone with him in an enclosed space. Then she settled. They rode in silence for a moment. "How is your brother?" he asked. She looked at him quickly. "You mentioned him once," he said, in passing. This was not exactly true, but it was close enough to the shape of a truth. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's having surgery in 3 weeks. The specialist moved up his appointment." A pause. "The funding came through, from the trust." Another pause. "I still don't fully understand how it happened. I didn't ask anyone to do that." "People notice," Duncan said, "more than you'd expect." She looked at him sideways, and he had the sense she was putting something together. "Not all the way, but close." She didn't ask. He didn't offer. "My father was in a car accident," Duncan said, because he hadn't intended to say anything, and his instincts had apparently decided to overrule him. "I was 14. We spent about 8 months trying to navigate the wait list. My mother worked 3 jobs that year." Saren didn't speak. She listened the way she always listened to everyone, with full attention, as though it genuinely mattered. "It turned out fine eventually," Duncan said, "but I spent a long time after that being very aware of the distance between eventually and now, and what it costs to live in that gap." The elevator reached the lobby. He held the door. She stepped out and then stopped and turned back, and she looked at him, not with the discomfort of a junior employee unexpectedly alone with the CEO, but with something more direct, more honest. "Thank you," she said, "for saying that." "Good night, Ms. Locke." She smiled, the real one, not the polite version. "Good night, Mr. Ford." Mateo Locke was discharged from Toronto General on a Wednesday in January, 3 days ahead of schedule. He was 17 and bored and visibly relieved, in the particular way teenagers are relieved when something ends, without ceremony, with an immediate readiness to move on. "When can we go to Kensington?" he asked from the passenger seat, still wearing his hospital bracelet. "Next weekend," Saren said. "And the dumplings?" "When you can stand at the counter for more than 5 minutes without needing to sit down." "That's going to be at least a month." "Then we make dumplings in a month." He was quiet for a couple of blocks. Then, "The woman from your office came to see me, from the 9th floor, Lydia." "I know. She said a lot of people signed something." Saren kept her eyes on the road. "They did." "Why?" She thought about it. "Because some people pay attention to more than you realize." Mateo was quiet again. Outside, Toronto was gray and cold and faintly bright the way it gets in January, when fresh snow catches the light at the right angle. "Did your boss notice?" he asked. Saren was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said, "he noticed before anyone else did." In March, Duncan accepted a secondment to Ford Group's Calgary office, a 14-month engagement that had been arranged well before any of this had happened. He announced it in a brief all-staff email on a Tuesday, and by afternoon the 14th floor had organized a small farewell gathering that he attended for exactly 34 minutes before returning to finish a proposal. On his last afternoon, staff came by to say goodbye. He thanked each of them individually, which was unusual enough that 2 people mentioned it afterward. When the office had emptied, there was a quiet knock. "Come in." Saren Locke stepped inside carrying the small blue notebook, slightly bent at the corner. She set it on his desk. "I thought you should have this," she said. He looked at her. "I already read it," he said. "That evening." "I know." She was steady, that's why. He picked it up. He turned to the page near the back. The list for Mateo was still there, unchanged. Below the original entries, in new ink, 3 editions. Kensington Market, done dumplings. Next week, Muskoka this summer. And below those, slightly to the right, as though she'd written it later and wanted it to be apart from the rest. Things I'd want to show someone who paid attention when it counted. The good coffee place on Baldwin Street. The view from the island on a clear morning. What Mateo looks like when he isn't in pain. Duncan read it twice. He closed the notebook. He did not put it on the desk. He put it in his inside jacket pocket. "I'll keep this," he said. "I hoped you would." A moment of quiet settled between them. Not awkward, just full. "Calgary," she said. "For now," he said. She nodded. She turned toward the door. Stopped. "The coffee on 14 really is better, by the way." He almost smiled. "I told you." She laughed. The real kind. The one that made it difficult to look at anything else in the room. Then she walked out. The door clicked shut. Duncan Ford stood alone in his office on the 14th floor, with a small blue notebook pressed against his chest, thinking about the view from the island on a clear morning and a list of ordinary things that had, over the course of one long winter, come to matter more than he had expected anything to matter in a very long time. 14 months later, on a Saturday in May, a food drive at a community center in the east end of Toronto was short 3 volunteers and somehow didn't realize until a man arrived slightly late with 2 bags of groceries and a note from the coordinator. Saren was sealing boxes near the back when she heard someone say her name. She turned around. Duncan Ford was standing in the doorway in a jacket slightly less formal than anything she'd ever seen him wear, holding a grocery bag in each hand, looking like someone who had planned this more carefully than he intended to let on. "You flew back," she said. "The secondment ended yesterday," he said. This seemed like the right morning to be useful. She looked at him. He looked at her. Mateo appeared from the next room holding a roll of packing tape and stopped when he saw the man at the door. "That's your boss," Mateo said. "He was my boss," Saren said. "What is he now?" Duncan set the grocery bags on the nearest table. "Someone who missed the coffee on Baldwin Street," he said. "If you're still willing to show me where it is." Saren was quiet for a moment. Then she handed Mateo the box she was holding. "Finish this row," she told him. "Are you serious right now?" "Finish the row, Mateo." She picked up her jacket from the chair. She walked to the door. She stood beside Duncan, both of them facing the bright May morning coming through the community center windows, the long folding tables, the stack of boxes still to be filled. "We have to finish here first," she said. "Of course," he said. "Then I'll show you the coffee place." "I'd like that." They turned back to the room together and got to work. Because some things begin with a notebook left on a counter late at night, and a man who told himself he didn't read other people's things, and then did anyway and couldn't set it down. And some feelings don't announce themselves. They simply accumulate, quietly and without ceremony, in the space between one ordinary moment and the next, until one morning you look up and realize they've been there all along, waiting for you to pay attention.